So the Arctic Council is the decision-shaping body for the Arctic. It is a group, forum of Arctic nation states and Indigenous organizations called permanent participants. What makes it highly unique in the world is that it's the first forum in history, and it's also the first forum anywhere in the world for the Arctic, in this case, but anywhere in the world, where Indigenous peoples and nation states are working on almost equal par to make decisions about the future of the Arctic, for the future of challenges that will be occurring in the Arctic and so on. We've not seen this before. So I think in that way, the Arctic Council offers back to international affairs and international studies a very unique way of political decision making, a very unique realm in geopolitics. How that began is also highly unique. So the Arctic Council began 20 years ago. It was founded, so in 1996. So 2016 will be the 20th anniversary. Prior to its founding, of course, there were the years leading up to that. And its founding is often credited to Gorbachev, who made a speech in 1987 called the Mount Speech. And in that speech he said, and remember this is right during the Cold War, he said we need to begin to look at the Arctic as a unique region in the world, and a region where the Arctic nation states are collaborating and cooperating. Why? For the protection of the environment. It is the first time in history that a major political figure, first of all, uses the environment as the security, the focus for security, rather than traditional military security. It's also the first time ever that a key political figure brings in Indigenous peoples and says we need to be thinking about their needs in the Arctic as well. What is lesser known, so particularly the people within Arctic studies are aware of this, what is lesser known is that the Inuit had already begun about a decade earlier framing a circumpolar world. And the Inuit played a role during Gorbachev's time, during the shaping of the Arctic Council. They played an absolutely key and critical role in the shaping of the Council. But so approximately 10 years earlier, the Inuit gathered as a group and said, we need to begin to work together. There's outside interest is coming into the Arctic, and this now we're talking about the 70s. Outside interest is coming into the Arctic. There is, desire for the resources in the Arctic, and not only that, as the outside is coming into the Arctic, we're beginning to lose, or our culture is beginning to be challenged, cultural integrity and linguistic integrity. So they formed an international Inuit association, called at that time the Inuit Circumpolar Conference. It's now the Inuit Circumpolar Council. And at that time they said, this is a new circumpolar world. This circumpolar world needs to be considered in future decision making. So the Inuit were also part, along with a couple of other Indigenous organizations, part of the founding of that Arctic Council. So you can see that in the 70s and in the 80s, or at the founding of the Arctic Council, what I find just so intriguing is that it's really the coming together of two very distinct intellectual traditions. The Western intellectual tradition, and then the Inuit, or Arctic Indigenous intellectual tradition, coming together to shape this new body. And when I say intellectual traditions, what I mean by that is very different ways of focusing on the world and world issues, and bringing those different traditions into this new body. So there's the absolute founding structure of the Arctic Council. So since that time, in the last 20 years, many advancements have been made. The Arctic Council as a council has only been strengthening in the last 20 years. And in addition, the Arctic Indigenous peoples who are permanent participants on the council, their role has only been strengthening. And an example of that is Canada was the last chair of the Arctic Council, and during their 2-year chairmanship, they appointed an Inuk, an Inuit representative, to be the chair for the Arctic Council. And consider this, today the US has a chairmanship of the Arctic Council, and John Kerry is the chair of the Arctic Council. So you have the Secretary of State being the chair for the Arctic Council. But in the last 2-year period, while Canada was chair, it was an Inuk woman. This is never before seen in history. Also, when Canada completed its chairmanship, at the end of each chairmanship, a declaration is written up. So Canada wrote up the Iqaluit Declaration. And in that declaration, it says that going forward for the Arctic Council, Indigenous voices, Indigenous ways of knowing must be included in all of the activities undertaken by the Council. And when an activity is undertaken and a report is written up, if Indigenous peoples or Indigenous knowledge is not included in that activity, then that report must explain why that was the case and give a clear reason for why Indigenous knowledge was not included. So you can see that going forward, the Council is only becoming stronger in terms of its incorporation of Indigenous thinking into politics. So to just take this back to international affairs and new frontiers in international affairs, the Arctic Council is still a relatively unknown body. More is being heard about it in the last couple of years because several of the Asian nation states joined as observers. So they're not council members, they observe. But as a result of the acceptance of observer status to Japan, South Korea, China, India, we're just hearing more about the Arctic Council in the media. So it's become more of a known entity. So I think the very interesting question is, how will this international body push against what are traditional international affairs, and perhaps create, perhaps not, we don't know, but perhaps create a new way of thinking about how we conduct international affairs, a way of thinking that includes the Indigenous voice in international affairs, that also includes the Indigenous way of understanding territory, which is a different understanding of a Western knowledge-based understanding of territory.